Hello, you wonderful people. So for today's video, I'm going to talk about I am not okay with this. This is kind of a compare and contrast video, but not really. It will kind of involve spoilers, specifically from the TV show, but not as much from a comic book, so just keep that in mind. But obviously, I am not okay with this. It was like a comic book series that was later adapted into a live-action TV show. I can't remember if it was February, but I can't remember if it was of 2020 or 2021 when it came out. Sadly, the show was canceled after one season, and I was really bummed about that because I really liked the show and the direction it was going. But I read the comic finally about maybe 2 or 3 months ago. My friend Anna had actually got me the comic for as a birthday present a couple years ago. That along with 2 volumes of Snot Girl. And but I finally read it. It took me a long time because I think I talked about this in my trailer discussion for the TV show, but I already knew how it ended because my friend Anna had actually talked to me about the ending a couple years prior to me reading it and everything, right? So I kind of already went into that knowing that, and that was prior to me watching the TV show when it had just come out at the time. So I knew how it ended, but then we kind of got the ending, and I was like, oh, that's not quite where I know the ending to be. So I was like, oh, did they just straight up change that? And it's this is what we get into that compare and contrast, which I think is interesting. Yes, things play out differently, but we still get a similar vibe from the TV show as you get from the comic, though I do feel like the comic might be darker in some of the approaches it has with some of the stuff in Sydney's life. I feel like it's a little darker, not I don't know, they go a little more graphic and a little darker in some elements of Sid's life in the comic versus what they do in the TV show. And I think maybe the same thing could be said about the End of the Effing World, because both of those are written, the comic books are written by the same person. I'll actually circle back to it because the End of the Effing World plays a big role in the conversation I'm going to have about I am not okay with this. But one of the major differences, and I think it's so interesting, granted, like I said, it has been a couple months since I read the comic, and it's been a couple years since I watched the show, but I want to say the show dived into Sid's powers a little bit more. It seems like that would have been, if the show had gotten a second season, which I think I only recently learned, the show, I think it's one of those casualties of the pandemic. What I was reading this article recently was saying the show was almost trying to be set up to be the next Stranger Things, but it was never going to be that because this is a smaller scale thing. And I think the creative force behind the show are yeah, people at Netflix wanted it to be the next Stranger Things, but it was never going to be this high science fictional show in the same capacity. It was never going to be that. So it was always going to be this smaller scale story. So it would have only maybe gotten a second season, very much like its counterpart, The End of the Effing World. Like I said, we'll get to that later. But getting back to the point I was making, that in the comic book, her powers are just a thing. She deals with it. No one knows about it. Very much like the show. She's kept that a secret from everybody, and she's just kind of living her life as she's struggling with her own sexuality, liking her friend, but her friend not knowing that. A lot of that, there's a lot of similarities between, it is that coming of age story in both the comic and the TV show adaptation, but they dive a little bit deeper into her powers, and that probably would have been a bigger plot thread going into season 2 if there was going to be one, because they kind of hint to that. Not only hint to it, that there are letters from her dad, and this is where we get into spoilers territory, saying that what she's going through, her dad went through as well, because he had the powers as well, and it just got to the point that it was too much for him. And so it also seems like there might be something behind her powers, especially the finale made it seem like there was something coming towards Sid. Even her dad was kind of running away from it too. This is the thing of I don't remember if her dad having the powers came up in the comic, but it was never dived into where it felt like the show was going to start leaning into there might be some darker force at play here. So it seems like that's the direction they might have gone. I mean, how that would have played out in the season 2, who knows? But without getting into it, that's a big departure from how the comic ends. Granted, the way it plays out, depending on how they went about it, you could still get the ending of the comic book in the TV show. The lead up there would be a little bit different, potentially. Not potentially, definitely would have been different. Because the thing that led up to the ending of the comic already happened in the first season, and since the first season doesn't end like the comic does, it's you could still get that ending. There'll just be more in between leading up to it, or they do a completely different thing, because this is where the End of the Effing World comes into place. I've never read the comic book that the End of the Effing World is based on, but I did look up, and Google some of the differences between the comic and the TV show, and there are storylines that were in the comic that were never in the first season of the show. Now, where the show ends, the first season of the show ends, is kind of where the comic book plays out. If you've seen the End of the Effing World at all, or even if you read the comic but never watched the show, if you know the ending of season 1 or of the comic, you'll know what I mean when I say the other version of the story went the other direction. And that's why the second season of The End of the Effing World is its own thing. That's not something from the comics. So I get the feeling the same thing would have been applicable in this case, where the second season of the end of I Am Not Okay With This would have just been its own thing. Like I said, you still could have gotten the end if they wanted to go down that route, but I figured they wouldn't, because to me, The End of the Effing World, I love how it ends, because obviously the season 1 finale of the TV show is ambiguous. There's a more definitive answer, like I said, in the comic, but then season 2 gives you a definitive answer of how it ended. But also, I love the ending to season 2, and I'm like, the show potentially could have gotten a 3rd season, but it ended with 2, and I'm perfectly fine with that. And so I like that ending comparison to what the comic book ending is, and the same thing would have applied in this. I'm sure they would have probably given this show a lot more of a happier ending than the comic. No spoilers on what happens at the end of I Am Not Okay With This, but it's a depressing ending. So I don't think they would have ended the show the same way. Could have. It would have sucked to do that because it would have been depressing, but like I said, they still could have. So like I said, this video isn't really a compare and contrast, but it is just that thing of like, it's been rummaging through my mind. I'm like, what would they have done with season 2? Because I think I looked into it a little bit more recently, and that's what I saw was they probably would have explored more stuff with Sid's powers and kind of what that meant in the long run. Maybe we even would have gotten some flashbacks with her dad, because you got her dad's letters, but you never actually got to see her dad. So that might have been something they played with in the second season. I don't know, because like those episodes to that show, I mean, the same thing with The End of the Effing World. The episodes are fairly short, so how much you would have gotten across in, like, I can't remember. I think the first season was like 7 episodes. I believe it was like an odd number of episodes, and those episodes ranged anywhere from like 19 to like 20-some minutes. So but still, there's a lot they were able to do with that in season 1, so it's interesting what they would have been able to do with that in season 2. I'd actually looked the show up just a little while ago, and like one of the auto searches for it is comedy series, so I think that's so interesting. I'm like, is that really a comedy? But I guess maybe the TV show, like I said, I think the TV show is a little more lighthearted than the comic is in some capacities. It still has that, like, I guess it'd be more comedy drama, but I mean, it's just, like I said, it's just a coming of age story. And just, like I said, I don't know beyond like just talking about these points what the real purpose of this video was, but it's just, like I said, this is just something that's been rummaging through my head for a while, and I don't know, I just kind of wanted to share that, because like I said, it's just one of those shows that was so short-lived that I'm like, oh, it's such a bummer, because having now read the comic and just seeing the setup potentially where a season, I mean, already, even before reading the comic, I was excited. I really, really liked season 1, and I would have loved to have seen where season 2 went. But now even more so after reading the comic, I would want a season 2 even more so, just to see where they would have gone and how they would have played those elements they were kind of setting up for a season 2, how they would have played out. And obviously, once again, what that ending actually would have been. Would it have been the same? Would it have been completely different? My fingers would have been crossed hoping for a different ending, but it's just one of those sad realities that we'll never know. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.